Y'all fired up now? You can have a seat. What'd you say, Maddie? You play Lauren Daigle every single morning? Every morning, man. Here we are.
What is it?
Including Sunday morning. You probably missed it this morning because you had to wake up so early. I woke up this morning and I thought, I wonder if anyone's going to be there. And here you are at 9 o'clock. Oh, man, I'm glad you're here. Last week, we had record numbers at 11 o'clock, especially in our parking lot, where we ended up having to turn away 30 cars. I know, and tell them, hey, I'm sorry, it's full. And at that point, there was no time to go find off-site parking and come back. And so, man, we've been working for the last probably 6-8 months on what it's going to look like when the inevitable time comes to move to a third Sunday worship service. And so we've been working behind the scenes. We started involving some of you, asking, when should we do it? We were very surprised to hear the majority of the people wanted an earlier service. And so here we are. We're working on the final stages now of building a timeline. We're meeting with our volunteers the next few days to just say, hey, is this possible? How much lead time do we need? How do we support you as we do this? Because I know it takes hundreds of us to pull off church on a Sunday morning for the thousands that come in our community. And so we are in the final stages. So start stretching. 3 services is coming soon. Hopefully even next week we can let you know a date we're going to make that move. But today, I would love to take an opportunity to just ask another question. Last time I asked, when would you want it? In the morning, in the evening, in the afternoon? Here's my next question. This will help us in the next few weeks figure out how to make sure when we launch 3 services, there's people at each one. If you go on the 3 Crosses app, and if you don't have one, you can just take a piece of paper out from the seat back. Here's my question for you. You'll see it on the app. You can just choose one of the choices. When we do move to 3 services, which will be 8:30 a.m. When you said early bird, I'm like, I can't do, that's only 30 minutes earlier. 8:30 a.m., 10 o'clock a.m., and 11:45 a.m. When we move to 3 services, which one would you be most likely to attend? So when you say, don't say all 3. That's not going to fix our parking problem. So if you've got the app, you can choose one. If you don't, you can write on a piece of paper and drop it in the little slots, little offering slots on your way out today. We'd love to hear from you for a couple of reasons. One, we want to make sure when we launch that we've got people in each one and not like 1,000 people at the last one, which defeats the purpose. And the second, we got to figure out what kind of legwork we need to do between now and then to kind of help make sure that when we launch, it's strong. So that might be my last survey question, unless the next one is, would you change your mind and come at 8:30 instead? So those of you who voted early bird, this is your time to say 8:30 and commit to it. So that's on the app, or you can send an email to the church. We'd love to hear your thoughts on which time you'd want to attend. Well, here we are. Matthew chapter 5 is the passage. You can turn there now. We're in a series called Kingdom Codes, walking through the Sermon on the Mount, and we're tackling some of the more radical teachings of Jesus. I think today and next week especially, the 2 most radical teachings of Jesus that I can think of in the Sermon on the Mount. And so I'm delighted to walk through those personally with you this week and next week. So we're going to read in a moment Matthew chapter 5, verses 31 through 37. But first, a moment of disclosure. There is nothing that I dislike. Let me start over. There's not much I dislike in this world more than going to shop at IKEA. And don't get me wrong, I love IKEA. Most of our house has been furnished by IKEA. Great, affordable furniture. I love putting it all together. But every time I walk into IKEA as a storefront, I feel like a rat in a maze. I feel like they've designed, and I think they have, architected the space to make you walk as many miles as possible with no escape. There's some shortcuts they post, and I think they actually just take you back to the beginning. I have not yet gotten to the spot that I could just blaze through IKEA, and so I've gotten to the point that I go in the back door, and I already know what I'm going to get. I get it off the shelves, and I leave because there's not much I like less than shopping at IKEA. And maybe it's just me, but I think it's part of the human nature manifesting in myself, where I believe as humans, we are people who are always looking for a way out. Always looking for a way out. My head is on a swivel in IKEA. I'm thinking, where's the emergency exit? What do I do if there's a fire? Right? I'm always looking for a way out. And I think, unless this sermon is about to be only about me, I think that many of us are always working in our minds to find ways out of things we don't want to do. Have you ever had it happen that you're on your way to a meeting that you don't want to attend? And in the last mile on the way to the meeting, you hit red light after red light after red light, and your brain, just without your voluntary taking part in this, your brain comes up with this idea, maybe I can call and say I'm stuck in traffic, because 3 red lights seems like, that's exorbitant, and I'm not gonna make it to the meeting. Ever done that? You've got a dinner thing that you don't want to go to, or some event at your kid's school on a Thursday night, and you're like, oh, it's been a long day, I don't want to go to this thing, and as you're getting ready, you hear one of your kids and something in your brain inserts, what if I call and say, the kids are sick, I'm not going to be able to make it, right? That's not you. That's the human nature in you that is always looking for a way out. Right? There's something in us that doesn't want to keep the commitments that we made, and so we make excuses to get out of our commitments so that we don't look like people who don't keep their commitments. Right? It's human nature. But it's also kind of bonkers when you slow down and think about it. I'm going to put this phrase on the screen, and I want you to read with me every time I say the word commitments. You ready? There are things we've committed to do that we don't want to do. So we create excuses that help us get out of the commitments we've made without looking like a person who doesn't keep their commitments. Right? That's the bonkers part, is that on one hand, our brains are excuse factories trying to get out of these commitments, but there's something in us that we don't want to look like people who don't keep their commitments, and so a tension exists in our hearts. How do I get out of this thing I've committed to without looking like a person who doesn't get out of things that we commit to? Now, we see a little bit of this in Matthew chapter 5. Last week, Pastor Ryan took us through the passage on lust and made some radical claims there too, where Jesus says, if there's something that's causing you to sin, take drastic measures. Cut it off, throw it away, your eye, your hand, if it causes you to sin, because it's better to lose a part of your body than have your whole body thrown into hell. And what you'd hope that the audience would think is, wow, my sin is grave. I need to cut off these parts of my life that are causing me to stumble. But you can kind of read between the lines with where Jesus goes next, and imagine that there's some people in the audience. Jesus loves reading people's thoughts. You can see that in the gospel. That there are people in the audience who are thinking, wait, what if my spouse is causing me to sin? Can I cut them off and throw them away? Because the next words out of Jesus' mouth are doubling back to say, no, you've made a commitment to your spouse, and so you cannot divorce your wife, like some of the teachers in Jesus' day said, for any and every reason. There was no no-fault divorce in the teachings of Jesus. And so then he goes to start talking about some of the most serious commitments we make and some of the lighter commitments we make and how we can be people who are known as folks who keep their word. And so let me read this for us, and then I'll explain it. It's a lot. This is Matthew chapter 5. If you want to listen to the podcast, AJ and I go deeper into it. Three Crosses podcast. This is Matthew 5:31. Jesus teaches that it has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, makes her the victim of adultery. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you've heard that it was said to the people long ago, don't break your oath, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you've made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. I know that one personally. All you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. This is the word of the Lord. And if you're taking notes today in the Three Crosses app, or you grabbed the outline on your way in, the high-level truth that we see first when we look at this passage is that God views oath-keeping with extreme gravity. You can write that down. God views oath-keeping with extreme gravity. Did you hear the gravity of the language Jesus uses in this passage? Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another commits adultery. Anyone who marries a divorced woman causes her to commit adultery. If you say anything more than yes or no, that answer is from the devil. God views oath-keeping with extreme gravity. Now, there's some of the things in the Sermon on the Mount that we've got to learn how to interpret. Like Ryan last week said, don't literally cut out your eye, don't literally cut off your hand. The interesting thing about the extreme gravity that Jesus uses to describe oath-making is it is not novel or new to Jesus. This is the story of the entire Bible. When you go back to the book of Genesis, one of the first covenants we see in the scriptures is God making a covenant with Abraham. And they performed this covenant-making ceremony that was actually common in the ancient Near East, where they would take an animal, they would sacrifice or slaughter the animal, slice it in half, separate it into two pieces, and then the two parties of the covenant would walk through the corpse of the dead animal as if to say, may God do this to us if either one of us should break the commitment we've made today. This is why we're glad in the book of Genesis that God stops Abraham and says, I'm going to go through this myself because you are not going to keep this commitment. I'm going to carry it out for you. Now, this is the gravity of covenant language. We see this verbally spoken in the book of Ruth, chapter 1, where Ruth and Naomi are making a covenant with one another as they go back into Bethlehem, and there's some bold claims that are made. Where you go, I'll go. Where you stay, I'll stay. Where you live, I'll live. Where you're buried, I will be buried. And then they say this, may the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separate you and me. There's a recognition in the midst of the covenant that God views oath language with extreme gravity. One of the things that I don't think we often think about is that we use the same extreme gravity language when we make vows, especially marriage vows. I think of standing on the altar. I stood right here with Jessica 21 years ago and made a vow that till death do us part. You ever think about what death do us part means? It means that marriage is a union that will last for life. It means that I am not free from my relationship with her until death separates us. And it means that in keeping with the oath language throughout the scriptures, that if either one of us should be unfaithful to one another and break this covenant, we're inviting the judgment of God upon ourselves. Death is going to break this union, whether we die and are freed from one another or God strikes us dead for walking out on one another. I'm inviting judgment on myself if I step out of this covenant. Throughout the scriptures, God views oath-keeping and the language of oath-keeping with extreme gravity. And so Jesus takes this concept and brings it into marriage. And in verse 32, he says, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for sexual immorality makes her the victim of adultery, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. There's a lot of nuances and thoughts that you might be having on your individual cases in this. And so let me start by just giving three broad strokes of this. This is Jesus' teaching on marriage that follows Jesus into the New Testament writings. So this is Jesus' teaching on marriage. You can write this down. Number one, Jesus teaches that marriage is for life. Marriage is for life. Till death do us part. Marriage is for life. The second thing that Jesus teaches, he gives a divorce clause in here. He teaches us that divorce is only permitted when vows are irrevocably broken. And why didn't I write divorce is only permitted in cases of adultery? Why did I say when vows are irrevocably broken? Thanks for asking. That was a joke because he didn't really ask. Because a lot of times we take this passage and say, oh, he's talking about adultery, because he says the word adultery twice in this passage. But it's interesting that between those two uses of adultery, when he talks about when divorce is permitted, he doesn't use the word for adultery a third time. He puts in another word, a word that we found in the last passage, which shows us they're tied together. He uses the word porneia, which is translated as sexual immorality, which is a term that includes adultery and stepping out on your spouse, but it's a broader word that can include any sort of generally sexual misconduct that can irrevocably break the marriage covenant. And this could be lewd acts, this could be pornography addiction, this could be wrestling with or stepping into inappropriate relationships with other people, even when they're not completely sexual. This could be grave things like rape or molestation, right? Any kind of sexual misconduct, gross negligence to the marriage covenant is all encapsulated in this word porneia. And so Jesus teaches that divorce is only permitted when the vows are irrevocably broken. And the reason I didn't use the word sexual in irrevocably broken is because as we read the New Testament writings, we see that pastorally, as the authors of the New Testament wrestled with the teachings of Jesus about the covenant of marriage, they had to wrestle with when this applied to other cases outside of classic porneia in the church community. And if you're taking notes, you can write this down. This is how I encapsulate this, is that complicated situations can require pastoral wisdom. Complicated situations can require pastoral wisdom. It's 1 Corinthians 7. Paul is in a church in Corinth that is just full of all types of porneia and other stuff. You can read Corinthians if you ever want to, I mean, you should read Corinthians, but it's like reading Judges. It's a horror story, especially like chapter 5, where people are sleeping with their mother-in-law. There's all this gross stuff going on. He's kicking people out of the church. And then when he gets to chapter 7, he starts talking about marriage. And he's telling some people, you need to stay not married. Not a good idea for you to get married. He's telling other people, you're married to an unbeliever, but they want to stay with you. Hey, who knows? God can use that union to bless your spouse. Hey, you're married with an unbeliever and they left you. It's okay. You're not bound to that person. And Paul, kind of like Moses in the Old Testament, is wrestling through all these cases with pastoral wisdom and trying to discern when are vows irrevocably broken. Now, the big question of the New Testament is, when are you still bound to that person, and when are you free to move on, move on, move on? 1 Corinthians 7 also includes phrases about separating but not moving on, right? And so there's a case in that chapter of when to move out from your home, even if you're not yet ready to file for divorce. You know, the complicated situations can require pastoral wisdom. Now, this is the beautiful but not fun part of pastoral ministry, is that as a church, our ministry leaders often meet with people who are wrestling through complicated situations in their marriage. And people come and say, what do? I don't have feelings for my spouse anymore. They've never done anything to break the bonds of marriage, but I just don't like them. What do I do? Right? So we have to use these teachings to talk about how to bring life-giving power back into your marriage. Someone comes and says, I'm in a domestic violence situation. I'm not ready to divorce my husband, but I'm not safe in my home. And we work with these people to help them find a place of safety outside of their home while they wrestle with what does that mean for their marriage? What does that mean for their future? These are not complicated situations in terms of get out, but if you've ever been in a situation like that, you know there's a ton of complicating factors that make this easier than just, okay, I'm going to move on. That requires pastoral wisdom. What do you do when you find your partner is using pornography? What do you do when your partner admits having same-sex attraction or transgender feelings? What does that mean for your marriage? What does that mean for your future? What does that mean if you take a break from your marriage? When do you get to move on? And when do you keep fighting for your marriage? And when do you say, it's over, it's broken, it's done? These vows are irrevocably broken. Complicated situations can require pastoral wisdom. I know that many of you, if you're experiencing some of these complicated situations, would love for me to just put a list of all of them and tell you what to do. That's not how complicated situations work. But I will tell you that there's a temptation that I've seen in church for folks who attend church, that there's such a stigma around divorce and there's such a stigma even around wrestling with marriage that a lot of times when people start going through rough seasons in their marriage, they disappear from church and the church community. They try to figure it out on their own. And then once their feet are under them again, maybe they'll come back to church. I talk to people sometimes. I say, I haven't seen you in like 6 months. Where did you go? She said, oh, I left my husband. I filed for divorce, and now I'm here. I'm starting fresh. And sometimes I'm sure divorce was the only option in that case, and yet it always makes me sad because I feel like these complicated, weighty situations of life, that's when we need the church community to give us wise counsel. And I think there are some cases where the reason that we leave is because we don't want wise counsel. We want to do what we want to do. We've been looking for a way out. And we're scared that if we go to a pastor or a ministry leader and say, what should I do? They'll say, you got to stick with your marriage. And sometimes we will. And sometimes we won't. These are complicated situations that can require pastoral wisdom. So as we live in church together, my commitment is we want this to be a church where we keep our marriage vows in high esteem, where we covenant with our spouse for life. I also want us to be a church where we equip you to have a life-giving, powerful, dynamic marriage relationship. We don't want to be a church that settles for boring marriages, but at least we're committed. We want to equip you to have great marriages. We've been talking this week about things that we can do to kind of infuse value in the marriages of the people who come to our church. We want this to be a church where there's not a lot of stigma around singleness, right? You read 1 Corinthians and Paul's like, listen, I wish you all would be single. It's great. But some of you, you're called to be in marriage. How do we help equip you to do that right? And in this passage, I really want this to be a place that when you're going through stuff, especially and even in your marriage, that you reach out. Reach out to a small group leader, a small group member, reach out to a pastoral ministry leader or one of our staff people or key volunteers here and just say, hey, I'm struggling in my marriage right now. Can I talk to you about it? I want to equip you right now that when that day comes, reach out. Call the church office. Send us an email from the website. Reach out to me. I'll help you connect with somebody. We'd love to be a church that comes alongside you when you're tempted to break your vows or when you're thinking that's the next step, is something's happened, it's over. And Jesus talks about the gravity of big vows. And in this passage, he talks about the gravity of small vows. And I think this section is actually more controversial than the first because it feels like, what? Let me read it. He keeps moving on. After talking about the marriage vows, he says again, you've heard it said to the people long ago, don't break your oath. It's like, amen, keep your marriage vows, but fulfill to the Lord the vows you've made. But I tell you, do not swear an oath at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it's his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it's the city of the great king. And don't even swear by your head, for you cannot even make one hair white or black. What's he doing here? You know, the skeptics question in our podcast this week, AJ said, well, he just told us to keep our marriage vows. Then he tells us not to make marriage vows. Should we just not get married in general? Right? What is Jesus actually teaching? What's he teaching about not making vows, even the smallest ones? I'm just going to say this, and then I'm going to try my best to explain it, because I think this is what's happening in this passage, and it connects with human nature. So give me a moment to walk through it. But write this down. We can be tempted to use oath language to make up for our lack of character. We can be tempted to use oath language to make up for our lack of character. I do not think Jesus is telling us not to make vows to our spouse, because he just told us to keep the vows we made to our spouse. And as we look at the New Testament, they tell us to honor the marriage bed. I think what Jesus is saying is to beware of the times that you are tempted to use oath language to make promises you're not sure you're going to keep. I'll give you an example from my own life. This is from 5th grade Danny, so don't judge me. I was on the playground at Stanton Elementary School, go Stars, and I remember having this conversation with myself. Now I'm looking back, was I a loner in elementary school? I don't know, but I was having this conversation with myself. Okay, how do I use my words to tell people I'm serious? And I remember covenanting with myself that I will not say, I swear to God, unless I'm 100% sure I can carry out the thing that I'm saying. And I remember covenanting with myself that I won't say, I swear, in general, unless I'm like 95% sure the thing's gonna happen. And then I'm like, okay, and what if I'm not 90% sure? I'll say, I promise. And I promise is like an 80%. And then there's like, I give you my word. That's like a 70%. And I remember kind of building this tiered system for myself to kind of let myself off the hook, which is ironic because I didn't tell anyone else about this tiered system, to let myself off the hook in cases when I wanted to prove to someone I meant it, but I wasn't 100% sure I could mean it. I was tempted to use oath language to make up for my lack of pre-makeup for my lack of future lack of character. And this is what the people were doing in Jesus' day. They were scared to say, I swear to God, because of the gravity that God takes oath language with, and so they swore on other things. I swear on the heavens. I swear on the earth. I swear to you by Jerusalem that delivery will be there by 5 p.m. on Thursday. I swear to you by the temple, by the gold in the temple. I swear to you by the hairs on my head. I swear on my mother's grave, you might say. On one hand, these are dogmatic statements. But Jesus says, I see what you're doing. You're making these dogmatic statements, but you're scared to swear to God because you don't want God to strike you dead if you break this commitment, because you might. And Jesus goes on to say, it doesn't even make sense. You know I own the temple, right? You know I own the heavens and the earth and the gold in the temple. You know I own Jerusalem. You know I own the hairs on your head. Any type of oath language you use, I will keep with the highest gravity because I own it all. So be careful before making oaths that are craftily designed to make up for your lack of character. And sometimes we do this on purpose. You're working with your team at work, and you're on the phone with a client, and you say, like I said before, I promise you, the package will be there by 5 o'clock on Friday. You hang up. And your team says, well, hold on. There's no way the package can get there by 5 o'clock on Friday. And you're like, I know, but I just wanted to get them off my back. I'm going to do my best. Hopefully, they're happy it gets there Saturday. Right? That's using oath language to make up for your lack of character. Some of us do it without even knowing it. And we're talking to our kid. Hey, I can't wait to see you at your volleyball game on Thursday. Dad, are you really going to be at my volleyball game on Thursday? Yeah, I'll be there. Why don't you trust me? Because you never come. You always say you're going to come. You always get caught up at work. You never come. You're like, listen, I swear to you, I'm going to be there on Thursday at your volleyball game. All right, now we've resided to using oath language to make up for our failures in the past. And Jesus would say, you have to be very careful because what you're saying is, may God strike me dead if I get caught in traffic. May God strike me dead if I don't make it on time. May God strike me dead if I decide I want to stay at work or I get caught in a meeting or my boss calls. May God strike me dead if my tire gets flat. This is extreme language you're using for a volleyball game. Are you sure you want to do this? Because whether or however you word it and however you mean it, when you're using oath language, Jesus says, God deals with this with extreme gravity. You're bringing me into it. And honestly, I feel like a lot of times you're using this language to try to make yourself look good when you're not actually that good, and over which things that you really have no control. And that's kind of where he lands it, right? Don't even swear on your head. You can't make one hair white or black. You can't control whether you're caught in traffic. You can't control all these different things. So stop using this language. We're thinking, when is it appropriate to make oaths? When is it not? I would say it's only appropriate to use oath language when you're making a commitment that you're welcoming the judgment of God if you break it. You welcome the judgment of God if you break your marriage vows. You welcome the judgment of God when you break your vows to honor and defend the U.S. Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. If I walk out on the military, may you shoot me on the spot as a deserter, right? Those are vows that you mean. I'll take the punishment of death if I break them. Do you really want to invoke the punishment of death by going to a volleyball game on a Thursday night? By getting a package there by 5? Jesus says it's not worth it. Don't do it. And he gives us a remedy. He says all you need to say is simply yes or no. Anything beyond this simply comes from the evil one, or comes from the evil one, comes from the devil. Yes or no. Or the action point for us in this world who are trying to figure out how to live as people as character is this: to build your reputation by keeping your word. Build your reputation by always keeping your word. I was talking to somebody a few weeks ago who did not keep their word, broke a promise, lied to someone's face. And he was lamenting the fact that now he's not trusted. This person doesn't trust me anymore. I don't know what to do about this. How do I get their trust back? And I had to explain, well, you've broken their trust. You gave them your word. You broke your word. It's not going to instantly come back. That's what happens when you don't keep your vow. I should have told him, be glad God didn't kill you. I didn't say that. But what I did say is, honestly, all you can do is from now on, say what you mean what you say, follow through what you commit to doing, live out what you've committed to live out. And over time, I said trust equals truth over time. Over time, trust can be rebuilt as you live as a person of truth. Simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't resort to swearing and promising and committing and big promises. That's only going to get you into more trouble. Just start being a person who keeps his word now. If any of you are out there and you're in the same spot, you've broken a marriage, you've broken trust, you've broken a relationship because you've lied or you didn't keep your promises, whatever it was, all you can do is start now, be a person who keeps his or her word, and let your yes be yes and your no be no. As we clean up and finish up this sermon, let me just give you a few things that we can do this week to live this out. Number one, I want to challenge you to keep your solemn oaths. Keep your solemn oaths. If you put your hand on a Bible, if you put your hand up on your heart, if you stood before God and witnesses and made a vow, keep the solemn oaths that you've made. Realize what you did when you made that oath. You invited the judgment of God if you stepped out of this covenant, whatever it is. And when I stepped on this stage 5 years ago and our elders laid hands on me and charged me to be the pastor of our church, the verse that we read was Acts 20:28. Shepherd the church of God, which Christ has purchased with his own blood. That's a solemn charge. And it is my job. I didn't swear the oath of office or anything, but in my heart, it's my job to live with character, integrity, to treat the scriptures as holy, to treat God with reverence, to shepherd the church that Christ died for. That's part of what I love about that Genesis image of the two parties walking through that animal, is that God sets aside Abraham and says, I'll carry the covenant myself because you're going to break it. But then when Abraham and all of us broke it, he sent Jesus to the cross. Jesus willingly went to lay down his own life. He was the animal in a sense that was sacrificed to make up for our failure to keep the covenant. So as a result, we want to be people who keep our solemn oaths. The second thing, this is a lot lighter, is I want to challenge you to eliminate oath language from things that lack gravity. Don't swear that you're going to bring the bagels to the meeting. Don't do it. Don't promise you're going to be at their volleyball game. Just say, I'll be there, and then be there. Eliminate oath language from things that lack gravity. And I'll give you a freebie. This is the opposite. Don't use fake oath language. I'm talking to the college students in here. Don't use fake oath language about things that you have no desire to do, right? Oh, yeah. Your party Friday night? Oh, I'd love to be there. I'm definitely going to try to be there as long as I get out of my class on time and there's no traffic. And if I'm not feeling too tired, I'll definitely be there. It's the same thing. You're using language to make up for your lack of character or your future lack of character, right? The irony is, if you would just say, no, I'm not going to make it, there's no lack of character in that moment, right? I'm just not going to make it. But when you give them the impression you're going to be there and then don't, that's when all of a sudden you build a reputation. How many times have you gone back and said, I told you I would try if all these things happen. All those things didn't happen. It doesn't work. There's something in us that wants to save face. Eliminate oath language. Third, be cautious over committing to things over which you lack control. Be cautious about committing to things over which you lack control. I think of people who are really good at this concept that I know, and they take every commitment with real big gravity. Say, hey, I'd love for you to come and speak at our church in October. It's like, well, let me check my calendar. I don't want to commit to you unless I can be there for sure. Then they come back and they're like, hey, I actually have something that I'm not going to find out until July. I don't want to commit to you and then have to take my word back on it. So could I wait till July? Because once I say yes, I'm in. It's like, wow, that's sure, absolutely. Or no, I can't do that, right? But wow, good for you. Right, be careful. Use your words intentionally. You know, Jesus says that we will be judged for every errant word that just gets thrown out of our mouths. Let's learn how to refine the language that overflows from our heart. With God's help, this is number 4, keep your word. Keep your word. With God's help, keep your word. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And finally, in those moments where you mess up, when you fail, when you break the promise, when you don't show up at the soccer game, seek forgiveness from God and others. And some of you have had a hard time listening to this message because you're still it's ringing in your ears what Jesus said about marriage and divorce. And you're thinking, well, I exited my marriage in an inappropriate way. What do I do? If you realize you've committed some sort of sin, seek forgiveness with God and others. If you're trying to wrestle through a complicated situation, like I said, even on the other side of a complicated situation, reach out. Let's wrestle through it together. Sometimes there's ways to make things right. Sometimes you'll find out you didn't do anything wrong. And sometimes we'll have to just say, you can't fix this, but how do we walk forward in a way that brings life in the future? Seek forgiveness from God and others. We are not people who always keep our word, but aren't we thankful that God is one who always keeps his word? He is faithful to his promises. And so we come every week and we step under his covenant blessing, and we know that though we will break it, he will not. And yet he was punished for our misgivings. And so we bring, even in this moment, our sins, our failures to him, and we ask him to breathe life into us again. So I'm going to invite you to stand with us, and let's close with a song as we lift praises up to the faithful one, our God.